Who are the rookies we'll be talking about at the end of this season? And will the Habs have a second Calder winner in a row? The race for the Rookie of the Year in the NHL begins again soon. All that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everyone, and thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner from Locked On Flyers. I'm here each and every Friday with Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. You can find the show over on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to get the latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Gil, we're getting closer.
We are. We're really in September now, and it's time. It's time. Training camp is literally days away, and I can't wait.
Yeah, and of course, rookie camps for the teams come first, which is why we're talking about the Calder race on today's show, as those rookie camps are set to probably get going in a lot of the markets late next week. Before we dive into that, we got like a few third jerseys revealed over the last week, so we're going to break those down a little bit because Seattle, they are being their usual selves and adding a little spice to the jersey conversation here with some glow-in-the-dark jerseys.
Yeah, look, and I think it fits when you think of their original color combination. It's kind of fluorescent. So, yeah, why not, right? I mean, but look, it's different.
And there are sea creatures that glow underneath the water.
There are. Way down in the depths. Yeah, they create their own light. So, yes. Look, as far as I'm concerned, it's bold, it's different. I'm willing to give it a shot. I want to see what it looks like during pre-game introductions when it is kind of dark and they're skating around.
Right.
I think that could be pretty cool. But yeah, I don't think it's bad. And even if it doesn't work out, it's a bold move. You take a swing. Well, why not?
Yeah, exactly. And I will definitely, as I always do, I go to the NHL store here in New York to check out the jerseys in person because I got to see it before I'm going to buy it. I can't just see a picture of it or see it on TV or something. I got to check it out in person. And I am lucky enough to be in a market that has an NHL store here in New York City, but a couple of other third jerseys this week that maybe didn't hit as well as that one from the Ottawa Senators, a bright red version of their jersey, and the Carolina Hurricanes, which like that hurricane logo is the problem. Honestly, it does not do well. You cannot like make a variation on it that works. Like I firmly believe that.
Yeah, it's a little difficult. I don't know. I don't think this particular jersey scores in my mind. I mean, it could be worse, but that it's great on the shoulders, but it doesn't work as well as a logo.
It just doesn't. I don't like that background, like that weird black background that's just on the logo. Like it looks weird.
It does.
It just looks weird to me. I think, the Senators one is a little bit better than the Canes one. I appreciate the gold accents on it. And I think that, the definition around the Senator face and the wing and stuff is a little bit more clear actually with that gold accent. So there is something to it. I like it better than the Canes one, but maybe not as much as the Seattle one.
I would agree. I think that's a fair assessment of where we're at with these third jerseys. Look, in general, I'm not that big a fan of third jerseys. I am more of a traditionalist, I guess, when it comes to these things. And, maybe one of my pet peeves is, like, in my mind, when I look at the ice, if I'm flipping channels through a whole bunch of games, it shouldn't take me more than 2 seconds to figure out which two teams are on the ice. So when certain teams go against their color scheme or don't include their logo, it just gets to be a bit much to me.
Yep, I firmly agree. I think if you're going to do it, you got to do it right.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say there's more misses than hits with these third jerseys in the NHL. For some reason, they haven't been able to figure it out across the board. But moving into our conversation about the Calder race this year, I think it's really interesting because we look at the Calder race from this past season, right? Where I think Macklin Celebrini was the presumed winner going into the season. And obviously, like, Lane Hudson was more of a dark horse candidate who wound up winning it. I think he was an obvious choice maybe halfway through the season. Like, you just knew he was going to be a finalist at that point and maybe had a shot of winning. But it was just such an interesting trajectory. And Celebrini, I think, stood out preseason so much more that it just didn't feel like there was a huge competition to start the season. And I'm getting similar vibes this year, but for a completely different reason. Like, I just feel like there's really nobody that stands out head and shoulders above the rest to start the season.
Yeah, I mean, last year everyone was talking Celebrini. The expectations were sky high, and it's interesting because you ended up with one forward, one defenseman, and one goalie as the three finalists. So you're comparing, apples to oranges to pears. You're not like having a direct comparison there. And this year, because a defenseman was the first overall pick in the draft, and because he's actually turning 18 today and may not spend the full season in the NHL, it just seems a lot more wide open.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, there's a lot of opportunity here, first off, for a lot of these guys. But I also think at the same time, the pressure is a lot lower on them in terms of award consideration. I think they all have, each of them have different levels of pressure based on the teams they're on and the circumstances and making the roster versus not making the roster, what kind of ice time they're going to get, and all those things that NHL rookies all experience. But as far as the awards, like, I don't think there's anybody truly that has, Calder Cup candidate pressure on them this season.
No, and I think part of that is because there is no player who was selected in this year's draft who was considered a quote unquote generational talent. Now, scouts don't always get it right, but when you've got that generational talent label, there's pressure to win the Calder, there's pressure to prove yourself right away that you live up to that label and that hype. And I don't think we have that this year. And it just makes for a much more wide open field.
Right. And I think much more so this year than last year, we have candidates who were drafted in multiple years.
Yep.
In a way that it kind of spreads the field thin in a different sort of sense.
Yeah. And I think it's a little more difficult to say, okay, these are the top three, when, there may be 5 or 6 or 7 players who have a legitimate chance at the Calder because it is so wide open. There is no standout favorite at this point.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that it's an odd thing going into this season because it's just from a tone, it's a very veteran heavy season as far as the narrative goes, right? Because you have guys like Connor McDavid looking for a contract, and you even have like Kaprizov, who was a Calder winner, but he was an older Calder, so there was
Right.
like all that, and the focus is really on the older players this year. I would say there really isn't an overarching focus on the rookies this season.
No, but as the season progresses, I think certain players will rise to the occasion. I almost guarantee you also somebody we do not mention in this show will be in the conversation come January or February. Whether they stay in the conversation until the end of the season remains to be seen, but someone's going to seemingly come out of nowhere and be in the conversation at some point this season.
Well, I think you're probably right, but let's hope you're not right, because we're going to attempt to name the guys that will be under consideration for the Calder coming up next.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is back, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. That's $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Do you like player props? Maybe building a same-game parlay to win even more? Or you could jump in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your favorite team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. So, are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet, and if you win, you get $300 in bonus bets. FanDuel.com, check it out today.
All right, so Gail, who are we talking about here when it comes to rookies that could be under consideration for the Calder? And we have to start with your New York Islanders here, because Matthew Schaefer, you mentioned first overall pick from this past year, defenseman. Like, first off, does he make the team?
I have been talking about this. In fact, I talk about it on the Friday episode of Locked On Islanders that comes out today. And I think he probably does, but he is not a lock to make the roster. And, to me, because of where the Islanders are in their retool right now, it is more important for the Islanders to concentrate on his long-term development than it is to have him rushed into the NHL to play right away. The fact that he only played 17 games last year in juniors before he got injured means he may benefit actually from a year in juniors. We'll see. I think he does make the team, but if he does, I don't think he's seeing top defense pair minutes.
Yeah, and I think that will certainly affect his ability to be a Calder finalist. The points just won't be there, and he's not going to be a power play guy, so that limits his potential for getting on the board as well.
Well, I think he will see some time on the second power play unit, maybe not right away, but I think he has the skills. And, putting him on the ice where he has a little more time and space to operate may help build his confidence.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens there. The Islanders also have another rookie in Maxim Shabanov. Like, do you think he's even in this conversation?
I don't think he's in the Calder conversation. I think he's probably most likely going to start the season on the third line. So I don't see that as being somebody who's going to, again, get a lot of ice time. He could see time on the second power play unit. If he really excels, he could move up. The Islanders power play, as we know, was pretty dreadful last year. But, the other thing about Shabanov is he's like 5'7". So, does he have the ability at that size to take the physical pounding that he's going to take in the NHL?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think it's just interesting. It's been a while since the Islanders have had two rookies that are in the spotlight, so to speak. So that'll be interesting. Now, if you look at, the teams that had finalists this past year, there's a possibility that those same 3 teams could have finalists this year. And I think obviously number one on that list is Ivan Demidov from Montreal. I think, all the early season betting odds are on him right now to win it. And so the Canadiens could end up having a repeat winner here.
Yeah, and look, he has the skills that I think would make him a good candidate. He's a little older. He's more experienced after having played in the KHL. So, the big thing is how quickly does he adjust to the NHL rink, to this more physical style. Those are sort of, the more north-south aspect of the NHL game is compared to the more east-west style they play in Europe. That'll be interesting, but I think he would have to be among the favorites for sure.
Yeah, I would think so. And there always seems to be one like KHL import in the conversation. And sometimes they win and sometimes they don't. But certainly I think the early season favorite would have to be Demidov. You're looking at the Sharks and the Flames, the other 2 teams that had finalists this past year. I think they're much, much lower in the conversation. But Michael MIsa from the San Jose Sharks and Zane Parekh from the Calgary Flames, I think, they're more dark horse-ish, but they're still there amongst the top of the crop of rookies this year.
Yeah, and I think MIsa has certain advantages, one of them being the Sharks have nothing to lose. I mean, he's likely to get a lot of ice time. He is not going to be buried on the depth chart. And it wouldn't surprise me if he's the 2C on this team from the get-go, which will give him plenty of opportunities. And look, last year he had 134 points in 65 games in juniors. Now, he's not going to come close to that, obviously, in the NHL, but it shows you the skill and the talent that he possesses. And again, how quickly does he adjust to playing against men as opposed to playing against boys?
Right. I think that's totally fair. And I think, with Zane Parekh, he's a very, very good player, but I just don't see him like leapfrogging all of these other people that we're talking about here. And speaking of these other people, should Schaefer make the Islanders this year and have a significant enough role to be part of this conversation, there's also, I think, a higher percentage of defensemen in the conversation than usual. Of course, we have Alexander Nikishin from the Carolina Hurricanes and Zeev Buium of the Minnesota Wild. And I think, there were some questions about Buium as far as injury and was he going to be okay. As far as we know now, those questions have been answered, and it seems like he's going to be at 100% to enter the season. And that's an intriguing part of this discussion.
Yeah, and he got his feet wet in the playoffs a little bit last year. So, and yeah, okay.
A bunch of these guys did.
They did. I mean, what are we talking, though? 4 games that he played in the playoffs?
Right.
But even so, that is something. It will make things slow down for him, and probably the regular season games will be a little slower paced than what he experienced in the playoffs last year. So I'm looking forward to seeing what this kid can do. But, it's tough with defensemen because they're not likely to put up the point totals that usually get your attention when it comes to the voting for the Calder.
Right. But like Nikishin also had those playoff games with the Carolina Hurricanes. So, I think those 2 in particular have got a little bit of a jump on the competition, at least from the blue line side of things.
Yeah, they do. And it'll be interesting to see how it pays off.
Yeah. And I think, you look at the rest of this list here and with, some other potential names, I think this is a little bit more of a drop off, but you do have Jimmy Snuggerud on the St. Louis Blues, Isaac Howard on the Oilers here, and even Ryan Leonard, again, who got some late season experience with the Washington Capitals. I'm a huge Ryan Leonard fan. I just think he's a tremendously skilled player. Is he skilled enough to break into this top group? I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, he had 1 goal and 1 assist in a combined 17 games between the end of the regular season and the playoffs. But you know what? The NCAA is really looking more and more like a pretty good place for prospects to go.
Yeah, I think so. It's really interesting. It's like the breadth of these players that we're talking about is so vast in terms of position and type that you're correct. And it's like apples to oranges and pears. Like it's very difficult to compare them at this point, especially because they're in different draft years under different circumstances. Like even like mashing those rankings together makes it difficult, but we are going to try to do that and pick out our actual top 3 that will be the Calder finalists. And oh yeah, are there any goalies in the conversation? We're going to talk about that coming up next. All right. So trying to whittle this list down, Gil, is a pretty tall order here. I think based on our conversation, Demidov is going to be one of those 3, right?
Yeah, I would say he has to be one of the 3 favorites at this point. And I think he's going to get the opportunity. I think he'll play probably second line minutes, see some time on the power play, and have a really good chance of establishing himself as a finalist for the Calder.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it would be a very unusual circumstance, especially because I do think that Montreal is going to put him in the best position to succeed on this front. I think of all the teams, they actually probably care the most about this and getting their guy on that list in the top 3. I don't know if they're as concerned whether he wins or not. But again, having it 2 years in a row would be a nice little feather in their cap. So they are going to do whatever they can to get him in that position. And I think their team is in the right spot in their development. Like they're taking a next step and they want him to be a part of that because he has to be integrated into the Montreal Canadiens that are a perennial playoff team again.
Yeah, and I think that'll help him in some ways, just because he'll have to keep that intensity level up.
Yeah, I agree. Now for that second slot, I'm going Zeev Buium here. I think he was very criminally underappreciated in his draft year and should have gone maybe, I would say, 4 to 5 spots higher in the draft. Like we already know that now, just a year later. So imagine what he could actually do. I think the Wild also provide him, similar to the Canadiens, the opportunity, right? They have the space for him. They have the need for his skill set. And so I do think like it's up to him at this point, but the Wild are going to give him all the opportunity and chances in the world to make it happen.
Yeah, and they need him to sort of step up and produce. And it'll be interesting to see how he handles that pressure because some younger players, you count on them and they step up, and some people are not ready for that kind of pressure yet at the NHL level. I'm pretty confident. I had him 3rd on my list, so he's also, in my mind, one of the 3 finalists.
Yeah. Now, as far as the 3rd spot here, I honestly could not tell you. I want to say it's going to be Nikishin just because we have more data to go off of. But My gut really says it's going to be another forward that's going to be more of a surprise, more of a dark horse candidate here. I want to say it's going to be Ryan Leonard, but honestly, it could be Isaac Howard. It could be Jimmy Snuggerud. I think those are the kind of dark horse candidates that have the better shot for me. But somebody is just going to go on an offensive tear and get the chance and will kind of force their way into the conversation here.
Yeah, I mean, Isaac Howard has been talked about a lot, and he was, on the trade block, and certainly goes to a favorable spot when you think about where he ends up landing to possibly play with some very talented teammates. You left Michael MIsa off your list. I kind of am higher on him. I know there was a lot of debate before the draft as to whether the Islanders should take Schaefer or MIsa, and I had a lot of Islander fans wanting the goal scorer, the offensive dynamo in MIsa. I think he's going to thrive in San Jose, and I think he's going to get some major minutes. They have other young, talented players who can mentor him, not so much like a 10-year veteran would, but someone who's like, hey, I did this last year or the year before. This is what you got to do. And I think that'll also help him. And just like I think some of the other players we mentioned will have a little more intensity because they need to step up, MIsa sort of has the opposite situation where there's no pressure to win right away in San Jose. Almost anything they do will be an improvement in the standings. So I think MIsa could thrive under those circumstances, and he would be sort of my dark horse at this point.
Yeah, I just don't think he's a dark horse. I think he's like more of a top contender here. And I feel like there has to be right, because I had to leave one slot open for a dark horse. And so that's why I did not pick him for that slot there. But I ultimately don't think he's going to win or the dark horse candidate is going to win. I do think it's going to be Demidov or Buium that will ultimately win in the end.
Yeah, if I had to pick just one and limit it down to that, I also go with Demidov of the Canadiens, which would be 2 straight Calders in Montreal, but why not, right? I mean,
why not? It's actually good for hockey, I would say.
It is.
Now, as far as the goaltenders go, like rookie goaltenders, it is very, very difficult for them to be even a nominee or a finalist for the Calder because of the way their development path works and getting limited ice time. And I think, Dustin Wolf, we saw got games previous seasons, but he didn't officially count as a rookie until this past season. And so you're looking at Yaroslav Askarov, I think, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah,
of guys that would have a chance.
I don't think it's going to be a very long list. I think you're right. That's, a list of one. And I think it's unlikely that he's a finalist.
Yeah, I agree. I just, rookie goaltenders winning these things is very, very rare. And I think, the forwards and the point getters are the shiny objects when it comes to the Calder.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing about Askarov is he may very well get a lot of opportunity to play, but he doesn't exactly have the strongest team in front of him.
No, that is also true. And so it's hard to gauge like how well they're doing in that circumstances. At least last year with the Flames, they were in a playoff hunt, right?
Well, mostly because of their goalie, but yes.
Exactly. And so, I mean, surprise us, San Jose Sharks, I guess.
If the Sharks are in the wild card hunt at the end of March, and he's their starting goalie, sure, maybe he is a finalist.
Yeah. So I guess, Gil, now that we've had the entire conversation, let's circle back to where we started from here in terms of the hype and the pressure. Like, now that we've actually talked through the names, did you change your mind about this Calder race? Does it feel more exciting than it did at the beginning of the conversation?
I think it does, only because it's wide open. And,
Mhm.
like when there's only one guy who everybody says is going to win, and then you sort of discount everybody else, that's not exciting. I mean, you want to see that player perform, but to have a crop of guys who it's kind of wide open and we don't know who's going to step up, I think that's more exciting than the other way around.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think that while we are not likely to see any record breakers here, we won't see astronomically high point totals for many of them. I do think that the competition will be there and it will be wide open. I would say probably even halfway through the season, that there's still going to be enough runway for somebody to come out of nowhere. I think, once we get to the Olympic break, it'll become a little bit clearer at that point.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, I guess. Yes. But yeah, we'll see. But again, rookie camps are going to start up in the next week to 10 days, and we'll get our first looks at some of these guys in their team uniforms on the ice in more of a competitive environment. And very excited to see it and talk about it next week. Gil, you will be back on Monday talking with 3 hosts from around the Locked On NHL channel about what's going on with their teams. I will be back tomorrow as well with Erica L. Ayala for the Women's Hockey Report. We are bringing on a special guest to talk Seattle and what their brand new team looks like. So that should be a lot of fun. Stay tuned for that. Thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen today. And we also will be bringing back the game night show during the course of the regular season. So stay tuned for that as well. Have a great weekend, everybody.